Hello everybody, my name is Ikenna from Smiling Sun. Everything solar installation, everything inverter installation, everything going green. Fantastic. It's so lovely to see you guys today. Hope everybody's cool. And today I bring you guys Fangpusun. All right, Fangpusun Charge Controller. This is 80 amps. All right, so this is an 80 amps 150 volts charge controller. So today I'll let you guys know exactly what to expect from this charge controller, because most times when I do these reviews, it's about my personal experience from using it. I don't do reviews if I haven't used the product. So I have used this guy over a period of time, and I'll tell you exactly what my experience was using these particular charge controller. So if you're wondering if you should go for a Fangpusun charge controller, or someone told you about a Fangpusun charge controller and you're having trust issues, you have never worked with it before, and you don't want to take a risk if it's your very first time of using the charge controller, which happens to most people who are very meticulous. All right, so you want to do an installation, but hey, you haven't used this charge controller and you're wondering, should I take a risk on it? How does it really behave? How does it really function? Does it really fit into my installation? But hey, you are lucky today, because I will definitely tell you everything that you need to know based on my bird eye view, okay, from my own point of view after using this charge controller. But if you want to find out all this information, you definitely have to stick around, because I will be right back. You're welcome back, folks. My name is still Ikenna from Smiling Sun. Everything solar installation, everything inverter installation, everything going green. All right, if you haven't subscribed, hey, come on guys, that's how you support us. Okay, so we need your encouragement, we need your support, we need all the help we can get from you so that we can go ahead and get you more and more reviews, more and more products, more and more information that you need around the solar technology world, okay? And of course, the more you subscribe, the more we can reach out to more people who also need this information. And of course, when you subscribe, you're definitely going to be the first to be notified once we have fresh and brand new videos, which happens right here every single week. All right, guys, stick around. Let's get into it. Fangpusun, how does it function? All right, so for starters, Fangpusun is an industrial grade charge controller. All right, so that means it's strictly meant for professionals. So it's a self-user defined charge controller, so you have to know exactly what you want. So if you're not a professional, if you're a rookie, I think you should be far away from this bad boy. Or you might end up having a bit of a situation on your location where you went to do your installation. You could be stranded. But even if you manage to maneuver it, which I doubt very much, you could leave a situation that might not be of so much benefit to the batteries of the person you're installing it for, the homeowners and all of that. Okay, so this is an industrial grade charge controller. It's 100% professional charge controller. So what that essentially means is that this charge controller will not leave the default templates that you have on the entry-level charge controllers. All right, of course, you know that the basic charge controllers or the entry-level charge controllers would always leave the templates where you can get to choose. Like if it's a lithium battery, it leaves a provision where you can just click and you put the settings on the lithium battery, or you put it on a gel battery or an AGM battery. But right here, you're not going to find that provision, because they already assume that you're a professional. You're going to be doing your settings on this charge controller based on voltage and current calculations for the batteries. Okay, so you have to have an information about the battery, and you'll be setting it right here. I will show you guys the settings and how it works. So firstly, the charge controller uses the square box tight screw. I'm particularly not a fan of square box screws, all right, because sometimes you might want to use very big diameter cables and you're struggling to have it tightened and all of that. But this particular one is really not so bad, because the box square screws actually can accommodate up to 25 mm diameter cables, so it's really not so bad. But if you find yourself in that situation and you have a bigger diameter cables, all you need to do is to prune it down a little bit to 25 mm cables, and you have it inserted into the box square holes. But normally I will always prefer cable lugs, the provisions for a cable lug. And why I love cable lugs is that it gives you that flexibility and that option to be able to use diameter cables to infinity, you know, so you can use 25 mm, you can use 50 mm, you can use whatever you have as long as you have the cable lock to be able to clip on. That's the first thing that you see when you're having to do an installation for this charge controller. So you have to take off this guy. This front cover would have to go off. So when you take off this cover, it's going to reveal what you're seeing here. That's where you're going to have to insert the cables, both for the wires and the one that is coming from the solar panel. So all of them, you have the provisions in here for you to be able to insert the cables. And I like the way they demarcated it, because some charge controllers, you don't have that demarcation that demarcates the negative terminal from the positive terminal, and sometimes this could cause a problem. And of course, you know that the DC connections or the DC charge controllers are very unforgiving when you put the wrong wires where it's not supposed to be. So once you mix up the polarities and fix it in the wrong place, okay, so the negative and the positive should never touch. It should never happen. If that happens, this guy is very unforgiving. All right, firstly, you're going to be greeted with a very loud explosion, and after that, you're going to see some smoke. Now you definitely know that a damage has happened, that you are in trouble because your charge controller is gone. And in some instances, it could even go further to damage the other components that are connected to the charge controller. And of course, the next in line to always be affected is your inverter. All right, so you don't want all of this happen. So I like that design of having a very big plastic clearly dividing the negative and the positive terminal ends of this box screw holes. So it has a dual cooling system. So this charge controller has a dual cooling system. It uses the forced air cooling system. That's the use of fans to bring down the temperature of the charge controller. And it also uses the air cooling. That's the use of heat sinks to sink in the heat from the charge controller. So it uses this dual cooling system. And I think that's really very cool. That in itself is going to prolong the life of the MOSFETs, the resistors, the capacitors, all the chips that is inside of this charge controller is going to last for a very long time, because the fans are ensuring that the temperature is brought down, and you also have the heat sink sinking in the heat that comes from the charge controller. So it uses the entire body as a heat sink. All right, so you have all of this going on, and you also have the fan blowing in and working tirelessly to bring down the heat from the charge controllers. It's handling all of those very big amperages. Now, of course, you know that if you're working with the basic entry charge controllers, you're definitely going to be standing in front of that charge controller for you to see the performance of the charge controller. So for instance, if your charge controller pretty much hits like 4 kilowatts or hits 5 kilowatts, if you're not standing right in front of that charge controller, you might miss that moment. All right, but you don't need to be in front of your charge controller all the time. You can go to work. By the time you come back home, all you need to do is you go to this charge controller, scroll on it, and it gives you the data login of what happened on that particular day, the highest voltage generated, the highest current generated, the highest wattage generated, the accumulated kilowatts. It tells you how long the charge controller or your system absorbed. So it tells you exactly how long the charging took from the DOD of the battery to full. That's from the bulk, from that particular state of charge to the absorption stage. It tells you how long the charge controller was able to absorb. It tells you how long the charge controller floated. It shows you the highest current generated for that particular day. It shows you the highest voltage. It shows you the highest wattage that you got for that particular day. And it also shows you the accumulated kilowatts. Now, that's not all. It also goes further to keep that information for you for the next 128 days, and that's awesome. Let's assume you were away from your house in some kind of vacation. If you come back, you can tell how the system has performed in the last 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and so on and so forth for the next 128 days. And that is crazy. You will see everything. You will see your performance for today. You will see your performance for yesterday, day before yesterday, fortnight ago, just like that. And that's really very beautiful, because I love logins, I love data. In that way, you can keep track history of how much energy that you're generating from these devices and all of that. So I really think this is very cool. That's one major function I really loved about the Fangpusun 80 amps charge controller. The charge controller gets stuck sometimes on charge. So when it fully charges your batteries in some situations, it goes charged. You'll see charged written on the screen. All right, so that means the battery is fully charged. But it's not supposed to be stuck on charge. But the moment you begin to drain the battery, or the energy from the solar panels begin to go down, and it goes down to the point where you begin to use the energy from the battery directly. So at this point, there should be a transition from the charged mode back to either bulk mode or floating mode, depending on the amount of energy leaving the battery to be able to compensate for the lost energy. All right, so if the energy leaving the battery is not so much, it will go back to floating mode and begin to do trickle charge to be able to compensate for the little energy leaving the battery. But if the battery is being drained deeply or the energy leaving the battery is much, then it should go to bulk mode and begin to go all the way to absorption. But sometimes it gets stuck, and it gets stuck for a very long time in that particular position, and it stays that way. So even when you're draining the battery, it's no longer charging the battery. And if that happens very often, it could affect the energy stored in the battery for you to use at night. Because essentially, while you're using the real-time energy from the solar panels, it's also charging the battery for you to use as a backup energy at night. But if it's stuck on charge and you start draining the batteries and it doesn't revert back to charging, that in itself could be a problem. There's been a lot of complaints about that, and I actually witnessed it firsthand. So what I discovered was that actually happens sometimes when you have multiple energy sources charging the battery. That's when you have the PVs charging the battery and you also have the utility charging the battery at the same time. The system tends to go to charged and it just stays uncharged. All right, so that in itself could be a source of concern, especially when you're gonna need that energy in the evening. But aside that, everything else works great. But there's also a function that takes care of that in the system. So in the system design, there's a provision for an auto restart, which takes care of situations like that when the system is hanging or where you have the system stuck on charge. The system on its own could automatically restart itself. So it depends on the schedule. So you can schedule it to restart every 2 hours, every 3 hours, depending on how often you want it to restart. So when it restarts, it naturally corrects itself from that situation. So one of the things that I absolutely love so much about this charge controller is the screen size. The screen is very big, it's bold, the fonts are very, very legible, okay? You can read what's going on the screen, and it's also very detailed. All right, so you can tell when the system is absorbing, you can tell when it's bulk charging because it's clearly written. So whenever the system is bulk charging, you'll see it written boldly, bulk charging. If it gets to absorbing, you see it's clearly written absorbing. So when it's done absorbing and reverts back to floating, you will see it written floating. So whatever is going on the system will always be clearly displayed on the screen. And I think that's really beautiful. Unlike some very basic entry charge controllers, you would never be able to see what's going on the screen. You don't know when it's bulk charging, you don't know when it's absorbing, you don't know when it's floating, and that can be very frustrating. But here you can tell exactly what's going on. If the system is bulk charging, you see it clearly written. If it's absorbing, it's right there on the screen. If it's floating, you will see it here on the screen, all right? If it's equalizing, you definitely see it on the screen too. I'm actually a sucker for the visuals that is on the screen of charge controllers and of course inverters and all of that. So I'm pretty impressed with the size of the screen. It handles charging of the batteries effortlessly. All right, it does it with ease. It is very, very fast when it comes to charging your batteries, and it can handle multiple batteries. It's very tireless, it's very rugged, and I was pretty impressed with the speed and how it was bringing in energy, how it was doing the controls, how it was caring for the batteries and all of that. One of the things that I love about charge controllers a whole lot, which is of a huge benefit to me because I'm completely off-grid, our charge controllers are charged extremely very fast. I just can't compromise that. Okay, so the charge controller must be very, very fast. And this guy, I can guarantee you guys, is really very fast because I saw how it was charging the battery. At no time, the batteries were all filled up. All right, so it's a great charge controller. So what I also noticed is that in some basic entry charge controllers, if you don't give it the desired voltage for the system to be able to perform, the basic entry charge controllers will definitely come on, and of course they'll be working, but the charging system will not be as powerful as it would have been if you had supplied it with the recommended and specified voltage for the charge controller. That's the minimum. It always has a minimum voltage and it has a maximum voltage. But for this charge controller, if you go below the threshold of the required voltage for the charge controller as the impute, so I'm talking about the PV input voltage, all right, that's the voltage from the solar panels. If it's below the threshold that is recommended for this charge controller, the charge controller will not start. Of course, the batteries are going to power it on and all of that, but it's not going to charge, it is not going to function. It's just going to be there staring at you until the threshold of that minimum required or specified voltage is supplied to the system. That's when you hear that clicking sound and the charge controller comes on. All right, but besides that, if you don't give it that desired voltage, the charge controller definitely is not going to function. But for the basic entry charge controllers, even if you're below the threshold of the minimum PV input voltage that is recommended for these charge controllers, it will still function. But of course, you will notice that the charging is not as great and as efficient as it would have been if the desired voltage was supplied. In most cases, this charge controller might not work with two in series, as the voltage that you're going to generate from the two solar panels might be below the threshold of the recommended PV voltage for this charge controller. And for the rookies or for people who are not professional, that are not trained to really handle this charge controller, this could get you stranded on location. Because you'll be wondering what exactly is going on. In places you were supposed to do 3 in series, you have done 2 in series. So you're not supplying enough voltage for this charge controller. That's why I mentioned earlier that this is an industrial grade charge controller. So if you don't know how to handle this controller, you might need to go for the basic entry charge controllers, but it's a great charge controller and I call it. It also has a lot of functions that are really beautiful. Like it has the absorb end, it has a Rebor voltage. Now in that Rebor voltage, what I love so much about the Rebor voltage is that you'll be able to tell the charge controller at what point it gets to, the battery drains to, and the battery gets back to rebulking. Now for most charge controllers, most especially the basic entry charge controllers, everything pretty much happens once in a day. All right, so once the bulk charging is done, absorption takes over. Once absorption is done, it gets back to floating, and that's it for the day. So what will happen from that point in time is that you're going to be having trickle charging, maintaining a balanced voltage for that, for whatever you set for the float voltage. So it's just going to be there. So once it notices that there's a little bit loss of power in the battery, it's going to replace it. But sometimes you get to drain the battery so much, even if it's already been fully charged for the day. Because that's one of the beautiful things about this Rebor charge, because what it essentially does is that it tells the charge controller at what point the system should go back to bulk again. Even though it's done all of that, it's bulked, it's absorbed, it's floated and all of that. So the system will re-instruct it again. The battery, I think at this point, has been way too drained. All right, so take it from this point right now and take it back again. So it's going to go through bulk again. That entire process gets to absorbing, comes back to floating and all of that, which is also very good. So what this function does is that you would always be assured and guaranteed that it's always going to be a backup energy for you to use at night when you don't have the utility. So it's really beautiful. So I like that Rebor charge, all right, as a function. And it also has a lot of functions like the absorb and the wake up and a lot of other functions which you're definitely not going to find in your basic entry charge controllers. This charge controller is not PV driven, all right? Because you know that in some charge controllers, unless you connect the PV to the charge controllers will never come on. All right, but this particular charge controller is not PV driven. It is battery driven. So once you connect it to the battery, the system is going to come on. The charge controller is going to come on with the fan and all of that. In that situations where you go for installation and you end up very late in the evening and you want to do the settings, you don't want to go back to that location the next day. All right, and the location is really very far away from you. You can afford to go and come back. You just want to get everything over and done with on that particular day. For the fact that it is battery driven, the moment you connect the batteries, the systems, everything light up, you have access to the charge controller and you begin to set the charge controller. Set all your parameters and you don't have to come back again. You can monitor it with shots and pictures, but you don't have to go back to that same location. So that's one of the things that I love. I don't like PV driven charge controllers just because of that particular reason of making you go back to a location when you absolutely don't have a reason to go back to that location. It can be very frustrating, it can be time consuming, and it can be resource consuming as well. So another thing that I liked is the flexibility of the voltage selections. All right, so there's a lot of room for the voltage, unlike the basic entry charge controllers where it limits you to a particular voltage. All right, this doesn't limit you. This allows you to select as much as you want. Because it's a professional charge controller, so it's assumed that it's meant for professionals, so you already know what you want to achieve. But for the basic entry charge controllers, you might hit a brick wall when you want to extend the voltage beyond a certain threshold. But this gives you that room to increase the voltage as much as you want. And of course, in line with the recommended voltages for these batteries. So that's one of the things that is really very cool about this charge controller. So it's really very good for you to be able to carry out experiments or do things that are outside the confines of your regular installations, because you have that flexibility of, you know, adjusting the charge voltage to meet every parameters that you want. So a con for this product, which has absolutely nothing to do about the product itself or the design, is the fact that they don't have after sales services here, so you might not get help if anything happens to this charge controller. All right, so that in itself can be a concern. I've reached out to Fangpusun globally, and there's just nothing they can do about it. They don't have after sales services, they just have dealers and distributors around. Okay, but this hardly ever goes bad, okay, unless you do a wrong connection on it, or you probably do a PV max voltage that is way higher than the recommended wattage for the charge controller. If it's connected properly, it's never going to go bad. It just keeps going. It's very rugged, it's very tireless. But that's just concern of the fact that if anything happens to it, in case of an eventuality, all right, if something happens to it, you're not going to get help. You might have to do an outright replacement for the product. That's all we have today, guys. Thank you so very much for being part of this. If you haven't subscribed, come on, we need you to be part of this community. All right, and of course, that's how you also support us. All right, so the more you subscribe, the more we can reach out to more people. And of course, remember that when you subscribe, you're always going to be the first to be notified once we have fresh and brand new videos, which happens right here every single week. Thank you so much, guys. We appreciate it. Don't forget to comment, don't forget to share, and do not forget to like. See you guys in the next video.